Yep, I see Steve's on the line. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Welcome to this afternoon's American Security Project webinar. This is an on-the-record conversation that will be available for attribution. A recording of this conversation will be posted on our website. All audience members will be muted during the discussion, but please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions to the panelists. With that, Matthew, over to you.
Thank you, Tucker, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Matthew Wallen. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the American Security Project, and I'm glad you're all able to be here with us today. In 2018, we released a report looking at the state of military recruiting and the efforts to increase the size of the Army to nearly 500,000, noting that despite the desired personnel increase by the Trump administration and Congress, the Army was cutting back its recruiting targets because there weren't enough qualified military available Americans to recruit in the first place. Today, we find that the percentage of qualified military available youth ages 17 to 24 is dwindling, down to a mere 23% of people in that age bracket. People are disqualified for a number of reasons, including criminal histories, mental health, lack of education, drug use, medical history. But at the top of this list is being overweight or having obesity. This year, the recruiting issue has come to a head, as for the first time since the establishment of the all-volunteer force, the Army has failed to meet its recruiting target by a whopping 25%. Today, we released an expanded update to our original 2018 report, and we're delighted to have the authors here to talk about this increasing challenge to military recruiting. Brigadier General Stephen A. Cheney is the President Emeritus of the American Security Project. He is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and has over 30 years of experience as a Marine. General Cheney's primary specialty was artillery, but he focused extensively on entry-level training, commanding at every echelon at both Marine Corps depots, recruiting depots, including as the commanding general at Parris Island. General Cheney also served as the Inspector General of the Marine Corps and commanded the Marines' entire Eastern recruiting region. General Cheney has been on ASP's board of directors since 2006 and has served as ASP CEO from 2011 to 2019 and as ASP's president from 2019 to 2022. Brigadier General Dr. Stephen Xenakis is a retired Army Medical Corps officer with 28 years of active service. He's an adjunct clinical professor at the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences. He has been a senior advisor to the Department of Defense on neurobehavioral conditions and medical management. He serves on the editorial board of the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law and the executive board of the Center of Ethics and Rule of Law at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Xenakis is also a co-founder for the Reason of Hope and an anti-torture advisor to the Physicians for Human Rights and the Center for Victims of Torture. Dr. Xenakis is a board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology and General Psychiatry, as well as child and adolescent psychiatry. And we are also thrilled to have Dr. Amy Rothberg here to help us better understand the obesity issue itself and to discuss some of the options for treatment. She's a clinical professor of internal medicine at the University of Michigan in the Division of Metabolism, Endocrinology, and Diabetes. Research professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences in the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan and director of the Michigan Weight Management Program and Diabetes Cure Clinic. Her publications focus on the epidemiology of obesity and diabetes, effectiveness and cost of effectiveness of lifestyle intervention for obesity and their impact on reproductive function, diabetes remission, metabolic syndrome, pain, and health-related quality of life. I'm going to give every panelist here a few minutes to speak, and we'll do a little bit of moderated Q&A. And of course, we do have a Q&A option for the audience. So as Tucker mentioned earlier, please submit your Q&A via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to General Cheney.
Well, Matthew, thank you for moderating, and let me also thank you for help for your editorial assistance on this report. Let me secondly thank General Xenakis, my co-author, who I've known for a decade plus, and helped put this one together, as he also helped in 2018. And of course, thank Dr. Rothberg for coming on this and give the certainly a medical side to this, which is a very critical piece and perhaps one of our most important additions to our 2018 report. And I want to thank Tucker Hamilton, who also helped us put this report together. It wasn't easy. I'll put it that way. It was a little bit painstaking when you get through all the statistics and look at everything. Of course, the one that perhaps threw everything over the cliff was the end of the fiscal year recruiting wise for all the services, which September 30th. And having been familiar with recruiting, I ran it for half the country for the Marines for a couple of years now. I'm dated on that, I will admit. But frankly, the recruiting side of it and the numbers haven't changed that much in terms of who you have to get in and how you get them in. But what has changed is the demographic of who you're recruiting. I'll put it that way. And there are a variety of factors here that go into not making what we call mission. But I will tell you, it's alarming. And when you look at this latest statistics, and it's not just the Army, frankly, it's all the services. The Marine Corps went overboard to try to make mission. And what they did was they took from their pool, and what you call the pool is the number of those who you've recruited and contracted, but they're not contracted to ship until further in the next year. So you have a pool, you have a depth there that you can rely upon to help supply numbers when you can't recruit them immediately. Well, what the Marine Corps had to do, of course, in this instance, and we detail this in the report, is they had to go back through the pool, take great numbers out of the pool and bring them into the last fiscal year to make mission at the end of the year. And they made mission. Now, unfortunately, the Army's pool wasn't that deep. And when you look at that statistic, 15,000 short, it is staggering. Now, I've heard some what I would call happy to glad from the Army Secretary and some others saying, hey, we could still do our mission. I'm sure they can. But the problem is, once you recruit these young men and women and you get them into boot camp or ship them to boot camp, in the case of the Marine Corps, it's a 3-month-long boot camp. Then you have a leave period. Then they go to their occupational specialty school. And then eventually they make their way to what we call the Fleet Marine Force, where you're deploying forces in the Marine Corps. So you're talking 6, 8, 10-month delay before the impact is actually felt upon that specific service. But it's huge. It is just huge. When you talk 15% or so not making mission, and then you multiply these numbers time and time again, I just don't see how they're going to be able to make it up here over the next couple of years. Now, I say that from this perspective, our report, we hope, sheds light on ways to assist them to get it to be made up. Of course, the number one detractor here is obesity. And it's a trend that is startling. We looked at it in 2018 and the numbers are huge. We detail these in the report specifically. The numbers have not gotten better, and they are just getting worse and worse and worse. And some would say I'm a sky is falling guy in this regard. And I will admit I am. You know, I'm here to raise this flag to say we have a problem, certainly recruiting, and it's going to impact our national security, but we also have a national problem. So I think I'll defer some of this to Dr. Rothberg and Dr. Xenakis, but when you look at it long term, the country has not approached obesity as the problem that it really is. And we mentioned in the report that, you know, at one time we looked at smoking, and remember the campaigns against smoking and what we did to counter smoking and all the things we put on Syria, and it is somewhat, it's worked. We don't treat obesity the same way. Cancer is another one. We really have the country has gone after cancer. Been a lot of research, a lot of developments. I'm certainly a beneficiary. Things have been done well on the cancer side, but we haven't been able to do that on obesity side with a couple of exceptions. And I know Dr. Rothberg will talk about this, that there has been some dramatic changes on the medical side that can assist on the obesity problem. So we list a number of items here that we talk about in the recruiting side, not just obesity. There are other things to do. And I can tell you all the services are well aware of them, and they're working diligently. And I'll cut to the chase on this one. The one person who's really affected perhaps more than any other in the military services is the recruiter. And we haven't done the recruiter any favors here, because that group is somewhat shrinking of what we call qualified military available is just not there. And it continues to shrink, obesity being the number one reason. And it makes that recruiter's job significantly harder and dramatically harder. And they've got to go out, they've got to find these young men and women, they've got to contract them, get them into the service. And of course, I'm a beneficiary of everything military, and I will readily admit I had a wonderful career. So can anybody else who can qualify to get in. The problem is trying to get in. So with that kind of laying the groundwork here, and again, I still want to continue to raise this alarm. It is devastating, in my opinion. It is devastating. I've never seen seen a mission missed by this number ever since the invention of the all-volunteer force. So we have a dramatic national security problem. With that, I'll terminate my comments, and I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Xenakis.
Well, thank you so much and welcome. And I salute you, General Cheney and the American Security Project, Dr. Rothberg, for all your effort here. This is very, very important to our country and to our national security, as you've mentioned. The health and fitness of our force and those people recruit anchor the capabilities, anchor the readiness of our military. And we've seen that recently. We know how important that is as we've looked out across the globe. And we looked at even the war in Ukraine. And we know that we have to bring in the best young men and women into the military if we're going to be capable. So understanding that in the importance there, our American military is both representative and a microcosm of our society at large. And with that, the leadership, we who have been in the military understand that it becomes very important for us to change and adjust and modify and improve what we do as we understand what happens in the society at large. And as you've mentioned, we're at a point in time now where many of the young men and women that we are going to recruit really are impacted by obesity and problems with fitness and a host of other kinds of issues that are part of American society. So this becomes important on us as a military to appreciate that, to understand that, to work with that, and to help these people along so that they can become the best soldiers, the best sailors, the best Marines, the best airmen that we need for our military. And it is an opportunity, actually, because we bring into the military older adolescents and young adults. They're in a big transition, in a change in their lives. And now we have a chance to help them really make a shift and, in fact, improve the quality of their life, improve their health and fitness, as well as what a lot of Americans find as they join the military. They find purpose. They find that they now get discipline and they find skills. So this is an opportunity for us to bring in and strengthen our military and to strengthen the society at large. In order to do that, we need to put in the hands of the recruiters and the military healthcare system the tools to do that. And we do have a cohort of people that we're looking at to recruit who are obese, have problems with fitness, and there are now capabilities. We now have interventions that we can use, and we can use them smartly. And we can put them in a way and deploy them with our recruiting commands, with our recruiters, and all our support services so that these young people can be fit, they can join, and they can give to the military, and the military can give to them, and it makes our nation much more capable. But there really are an array of tools that our recruiters need. And we understand that. And as they work with these young people, and you look at the fact that the typical cycle can be months, 6 months, 9 months, sometimes a year, this opens the door for these recruiters now to work with these young men and women and look at their diet and look at their activities and look at their fitness and look at everything that they are doing in their lifestyles so they can meet a goal. And that goal is so that they can join the military and be the best service members that they can be. So that's what we're emphasizing here. And it's a time to do that. It's a time to do that not only for our military, but it's a time to do it for our society at large, because this is what the health and fitness of our country is very important to our national security in many, many ways. So I think this report is really important. I'm glad to and hope that the military sees it. It takes from it, it excerpts from it what it needs to do. And now we can come back and in fact, be smarter and be more effective as we're recruiting these young men and women and building up and keeping our military strong. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Rothberger, who's got quite a bit of experience here, and she can talk about the kinds of interventions that we have available and that can be used by our recruiting command and by our military health services. Dr. Rothberger.
Thank you, General Zanakis, and thank you, General Cheney and Mr. Wallen for inviting me to contribute today. And I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, well, I want to start with what is obesity. It's excess body fat or abnormal fat accumulation that poses a risk to health, and it's often mischaracterized as a lifestyle choice. But it's a complex disease resulting from our gene and gene environmental interactions. And it's a chronic disease and should be treated as such. This is not dissimilar from cancer, where one can experience remission, but also relapse. So the prevalence of both overweight and obesity have increased in every age group and every region of the world. And I'm just showing you the graphs of between 1980 and 2016 in adults age greater than 20 on the top, children between the ages of 5 and 19 on the bottom, and to the far right, children who are less than 5 years old. Yep, not sure what happened to my slides. The number of states with high rates of obesity also doubled in the past year. Adult obesity rate has increased 37% in just the last 2 decades, and youth obesity rate has increased 42% just since 2000. What's more worrisome is actually childhood obesity, which is predicted to increase by 60% by 2030. That means around 250 million children will be affected. Worldwide, 800 million people have obesity. So for that next generation, simulation models predict that 2-year-olds with obesity have a 75% probability of obesity at age 35. And based upon current body mass index levels, more than half of our children will be obese by the time they're 35 years old. And among children with severe obesity, the likelihood of not having obesity at age 35 is 27% in 2-year-olds and 6% in 19-year-olds. But the regulation of eating, that is, when we eat, is governed by peripheral signals from our gastrointestinal system and our fat stores, which relay information to our brain to tell us when we are hungry or full. And these are our homeostatic controllers. But why we eat, what we eat, and the amount we eat is governed by taste perception and palatability, portion size, caloric density, the environmental setting in which we consume our meals, the timing of meals, composition of meals, and of course, established habit. But this is an inexhaustive list of the hedonic controllers of weight. And food reward systems are essentially go systems. And while they can be diminished by our hunger and satiety signals, they are normally never off. And when we lose weight, we are set up to have these metabolic adaptations that occur and reset our weight or predispose us to weight regain. We defend our higher weight. And these include an increase in the hunger hormone, ghrelin, a dampening down of the satiety signals, a decrease in our resting energy expenditure, and we become more efficient with the calories we take in. There are also a number of social and environmental drivers of the current obesity incidence and control. I think we all understand that our food system is laden with sugar-sweetened beverages, highly and ultra-processed and fast foods. There's some sort of disingenuous labeling and marketing and pricing and incentives for buying these high in calorie foods. There's a public housing shortage with poor quality neighborhood safeties. There's limited literacy around nutrition. And for example, some of our programs in the schools, such as physical education programs and school lunches, have just been decimated. Of course, there's a lack of living wage for a number of people. And like me, I work in a relatively sedentary workspace. And then we have health policies that just have not prioritized this as a public health concern. So let's just look at our energy intake just from the early 1900s to 2000. On the top in purple, I'm showing you the increase in total consumption uncorrected for waste, that is plate waste, and on the bottom with the same slope adjusted for weight. And our calories have, even adjusted for losses, has increased 20% between 1982 and 2000. And obesity is associated with a number of complications for which there is very strong evidence, such as diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and 13 different cancers. In fact, there are over 230 complications where the root cause is obesity. The economic costs are absolutely staggering. The estimated direct and indirect costs calculated from the Medical Expenditure Panel Survey using the concept of the treated prevalence of health conditions that are associated with obesity compared to normal weight individuals. In 2016, the cost attributable to the prevalence of obesity was a price tag of $1.72 trillion, equivalent to 9% of our GDP. That was $480 billion in direct healthcare costs and $1.24 trillion in indirect costs due to lost economic productivity. And as the generals have said, this has implications for our military. So approximately 1 in 5 of our children and 2 of 5 adults in the United States have obesity. Just over 1 in 3 young adults aged 17 to 24 is too heavy to serve in our military. And among the young adults who meet weight requirements, only 3 in 4 report physical activity levels that prepare them for challenges in basic training. So consequently, only 2 in 5 young adults are both weight eligible and adequately active. So again, this impairs military readiness and our national security. There's been an increase in nationwide obesity prevalence reflected in the military. This is not dissimilar from the civilian population. 19% of our active duty service members had obesity in 2020, and this is an increase of 3% just from the preceding year. Further, obesity is more common among Black Americans and Hispanics, who represent 36% of U.S. military. And as General Cheney and General Sigonakis said, the Army fell short of meeting its recruitment goal in 2022. More than 3/4 of our 17 to 24-year-olds are ineligible to serve. And a 2015 study of active duty and non-active duty U.S. Navy personnel found that the standard BMI cutoffs for obesity significantly underestimated the excess percent body fat as determined by our gold standard modality, that is body composition by DEXA. Again, the costs are striking. The DoD spends $1.5 billion in obesity-related healthcare costs, and there were 658,000 lost workdays per year due to obesity. And as I remind you, it is a complex disease, and there are 2 central CNS pathways that play a key role in regulating eating behavior, cravings, and weight. And on the left, largely under the control of the hypothalamus, are the hunger and satiety signals and systems, and on the right, the reward pathway that often co-opts the homeostatic controllers. But the good news is that we have currently in our armamentarium anti-obesity medications that address both pathways. So there is treatment, but we have to recognize that obesity requires a comprehensive approach. Intensive behavioral therapy promotes weight loss through high intensity, comprehensive, and structured diet and exercise programs. And this is recommended and endorsed by the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force. Medical nutrition therapy is nutrition-based treatment provided by a registered dietitian or nutritionist, and anti-obesity medications, which are proven scientific therapies approved by the FDA. Barriers to treatment include that IBT coverage is limited in Medicare. Only 2% of Medicare beneficiaries with obesity receive IBT. Medicare doesn't cover outpatient medical nutrition therapy, and there's a prohibition on anti-obesity medications, and TRICARE follows suit. It only covers obesity surgery for certain limited conditions, and the non-surgical treatment of obesity is not covered, and only some of our older medications are covered. Don't let quite go on there. So here is now our armamentarium of a number of weight loss or effective weight loss therapy. And just in the past 5 years, we've added the GLP-1s, which have consistently shown very effective weight loss. These are liraglutide, semaglutide, and newer on the market, tirzepatide. And they have weight losses that are approach bariatric surgery outcomes. In fact, I call these bariatric surgery without the operation. So as we are seeing more and more people with moderate to severe forms of obesity, we need to conceptualize this. We need to get the weight not just down by a little bit, but by a lot more. In fact, we know that as little as 3% can reduce the risk of progression from prediabetes to type 2 diabetes, but we need at least 10%, if not 15%, to resolve or put into remission almost all of these other comorbid health conditions. So lastly, I just wanted to say this. We need to remember that obesity is a chronic disease and that weight loss and weight loss maintenance require a long view, lifelong behavioral and lifestyle change. But how do we keep individuals committed where the loss of the novelty of benefits of weight loss wane, behavioral fatigue sets in, and our biology make it so tough? So we need to appeal to the individual's core values, their likes, their allegiances, to make working on long-term weight control more salient. And so where I live, sports, especially Michigan college football, is huge. And when their legendary athletes speak, their fans listen. So I'm just going to show you a clip of football icon Desmond Howard, who is an ambassador of a lifestyle intervention called Rewind, whose mission is to reduce weight in order to defeat type 2 diabetes, speaking with a local radio talk show host, Sam Webb, at the Big House, which is our stadium in Michigan, about the program. So in effect, Desmond Howard and Sam Webb are bringing their community to the intervention to get the community to the intervention and stay in the intervention.
You may need to share the other window that is showing the video. Dr. Rothberg, we're unable to see the video on that. I'm sorry.
So I'll stop there and stop sharing.
All right, thank you for your presentation. I've got a few questions to ask of the panelists, so I hope everybody's got some time. And of course, if you have questions in the audience, please submit them via the Q&A box, and we will get to those that we can get to. Dr. Rothberg, you brought up the issue that once people lose weight, their bodies tend to want to cause them to regain that weight. And in terms of your research and your experience, and being that we've heard so often about how diets don't work and that people often regain the weight that they've lost, are there effective methods for helping them keep off the weight once they've lost it?
So thanks for that question. Yes, I mean, the issue is, as I've stated, this is a chronic disease, and we should not expect that people are going to regain weight if they are not continuing to be involved in whatever that intervention is. So we need to retain people. We need to have continued follow-up to address the cycle of weight regain and weight loss. We do have effective therapies. Again, IBT is usually structured over a 2-year intervention, although most people continue to follow beyond the 2 years. And we have effective drug therapy. And some of these drugs, although, pharmacotherapy the pharma would have you believe that they need to be always continued, there is a way to start and stop these therapies. So if people are doing well and they want to get off the medication, they can go off the medication. And if they are having or experiencing an uptick, they may need to take that medication again. But again, we have to take a long view. We have to support them, and we have to evolve our strategies over time. And we have to tailor to that particular individual.
Thank you. General Cheney, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the delayed entry pools and how this becomes sort of a compounding problem. I mean, if the Army misses its goal by 15,000 next year, what does that mean for the year after that, and then the year after that? Can you tell us a little bit more about how the pools work and why this is going to become a bigger problem?
Yeah, Matthew, you've hit the nail on the head. It becomes a compounding problem. And as I mentioned, my experience, of course, was with the Marines, and where we would traditionally build a pool of at least 50%, but in many cases, 60 or 70, meaning when we crossed the threshold on October 1st, we already had 60% of those enlisted that were going to join in that upcoming year. So obviously it relieves the significant pressure on the recruiter to bring in those qualified. They can continue to work, and it's like putting money in the bank and compounding interest. The more you get, the better it gets. The more you have, the harder the recruiter can go and keep searching further out. Unfortunately, that cushion is certainly no longer there for the Army, and it's much smaller for the Marine Corps, and I can state the same for the Navy and Air Force, that because they had to make mission and they wanted to get those in at the end of the last fiscal year, they went to the pool and said, okay, you've signed up to come in November, December, January, February, or what we call FMAM, February, March, April, May. We're going to move you back, and you're going to come in much earlier. So in essence, when you get to February, March, April, and May, the pool is empty. And that is I will tell you, a very, very difficult time of the year to recruit, because most young men and women are in high school, seniors. They don't graduate till May or June. They're just not available in that time of year, and the pool literally runs dry. So that covers the current year, but when you go to the out years, it gets even worse. So that's when I look at what happened to the Army, and it missing mission by that staggering number, you kind of go, what is going to happen this next year? And I just can't predict. I can't be optimistic. So it brings up one other point that you opened the door for me. I'm going to walk through it, that this is not an Army problem. This is a national problem. And of course, obesity is a national problem, as Dr. Rothberg has pointed out. It is the #1 contributor to those not being eligible, but there are a number of other factors that are involved in this too, that I can tell you all the services are working on just as well. But the clarion call has come. This is not spelling doom for our armed forces, but because we have a robust and a large armed force. We got an Army Guard, Air Guard, we've got Army National Guard, we got State Guard. I mean, we've got redundancy here. And as Secretary Wormuth has said, we're going to continue to fulfill our commitment to the defense of the country, but the readiness of the force is got to diminish. I mean, you need people to run your services, and they're just not going to be there. So this is a tough problem, and it's just not the Army's fault per se. It's a national fault. And so people would go, okay, the Army can't solve that problem. Who's going to? Well, it starts everywhere. It starts on Capitol Hill. It starts in local governments. It starts with local schools. It starts with everybody, to be frank with you. So, and I think the medical is another piece that we put into this puzzle of things that we said are partial solutions here. This is one we didn't have in 2018. That will help. Won't solve the problem entirely, but it will help. So there are ways to go about it. But again, I think we're raising the flag now. We have a national problem. And as Dr. Rothberg says, we need to treat obesity as a disease. I don't hear people talking about it that way hardly ever. You're overweight, you have a disease. You do have a disease, and we know how to treat it. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer to your question, Matthew.
And General Xenakis, I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on how mental health has contributed to the issue, especially as we look over the course of the pandemic and the impact on people's mental health, particularly on that of adolescents and those entering the military recruiting age. Has it contributed to the recruiting problem? Has it contributed to obesity? What are your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, and just look at one of the first slides that Dr. Rothberg showed in terms of where you look at hunger and obesity and satisfaction and eating, satiation. You have all these parts of the brain, and then you have the functioning in that brain that also overlap with depression, anxiety, thinking. So, I mean, we're complex individuals. And even though we tend to think about particular problems or in specialty areas, and we like to compartmentalize, the fact is that we as a whole are much bigger than the sum of the parts. And all these factors play with each other and affect and influence each other. So that we know, I mean, any of us who've been in practice many years know that people who are anxious and depressed tend to eat. That's been a way for them to relieve their anxiety and depression. And as they eat more and in fact get less fit and feel heavier and have more problems sleeping, then they feel more depressed and more anxious. Now you add on to that we've had now 2.5 years of the pandemic, and it's really affected people's daily lives. They're isolated. They can't interact with each other. Their activity has changed. These have had profound effects on everybody. And it means that we need to sit back and acknowledge that, pick it apart, think about now what are the smarter ways that these young people that have been affected by all these different factors now, how can we work with them and help them get over that? I mean, there's no doubt that they've been carrying the burden of all this at a very tough time. I mean, there are a host of other issues occurring in our society. So all these pile on, and we need to be able to find those young people that are motivated, are looking for some light at the end of the tunnel, want to change their lives, and see that getting into the military gives them an option. Now, what Dr. Rothberg's pointed to is we've got some tools. Our responsibility is configuring those tools, figuring out how we get them in the hands of the recruiters and how we get them in the hands of the military leadership so they can work with those individuals that want to come into the military. That's the next steps. And I think that we can do that because we've done that before, but now is a time for us to leverage those. They're there, they're being used. We have to just customize and modify them and figure out what's the smartest way to work with these folks.
It seems to me, and this is a question for both the generals, that we've got sort of two problems. We have that not enough people are interested in joining the military, and that some of those that are interested can't join for various reasons, like obesity. So are there solutions for this? I mean, how do we get more people interested in actually joining the military? Are there ways we can make it more appealing? What motivates somebody to want to serve? And if they're not motivated, what would motivate them? And then secondly, should we be outright excluding everybody who is simply overweight or obese if they don't necessarily need to be fit to perform their actual duties?
Yeah, Matthew, I'll take a shot at this first to say that proclivity to join, or the propensity of those who would like to join, that number has gone down dramatically over the last year or two. And it's a result of a number of things. Perhaps now that the economy is starting to pick up and unemployment is going down, meaning employers are looking, and when the employment picture gets better, it impacts the military, of course, because the young men and women aren't looking in that direction. They're looking at other opportunities they might have. And it impacts some of the things we mentioned in our results here about pay and allowances and privileges and things that the military does that could be improved to make it more attractive to come into the military. So it's a message that isn't quite getting across to today's youth as the way it should be. Unfortunately, or depending on how you look at it, can be fortunate. A lot of the young men and women coming in today are related to previous military members because they've had a good experience here. They understand what it's all about. But a vast majority of our youth and population today are not exposed to exactly what the military is. And of course, a lot of that, in my opinion, is tainted positively and negatively by the media. You can look at some of the movies that come out and go, okay, is this one good or is this one bad? And I won't point out some that have reflected badly on the Marine Corps, but they're certainly there. Whereas there's some that are much more positive. So it's a tough message. It's got to get across. We want to let them know that it's a very rewarding career, and it can lead to phenomenal opportunities. But some are just not aware of it. So it's a hard. That's why I mentioned the recruiter is the one who bears the brunt of this. And one last point: if there was anything good about COVID ending, it was that now the recruiters can get into the high schools, whereas with COVID they couldn't. And your biggest population, of course, are your high school students, and getting that message across. And I will say, in relation to when I first came into the military in the late 60s, the attitude towards the military was bad, and we had the draft at the time. We did away with the draft, got the all-volunteer force coming in 72, 73 timeframe, and we built upon that, and it's been eminently successful, but now it's starting to founder. So it's an all-the-team effort, I'll put it that way, Matthew.
I just want to add to that, because I think General Cheney, who's been to recruitment, understands, is we have seen this before. And we saw this 40 years ago. And for the Army, we had a very inspired leader, General Max Thurmond, who became the Vice Chief of Staff and then retired as a Southcom commander. But as he was first a recruiting command commander and then the Chief of Personnel, he brought in a team of people that understood what American youth were living with, how they felt. And that's how we got the slogan, "Be all you can be." And that inspired young people. That gave them something to work towards. That gave them a purpose. And that was not easy coming out of Vietnam. I mean, this was in the early 80s as we were young officers, maybe not so young at that time. But we remember how hard it was coming out of Vietnam. And we needed this kind of inspired leadership who understood how to reach out, how to get a message across, and what people were thinking and feeling. And I think that's the lesson learned right now. That gives people a purpose, that motivates them. But then when we've got folks that want to do that, knowing that they're coming from a society where there isn't as much of an emphasis on where we've got obesity and we've got problems with fitness, we now need to give those recruiters the tools to help those people. They can be motivated, but they need the tools so that they can qualify and they can know that they're feeling gratified and satisfied and accomplished in what they're doing. So that's kind of how you wrap a program together and design it so it's effective and you get who you need into the military.
And with that, are there any final thoughts that anybody would like to offer?
Well, Matthew, I'll give one, and then I'll turn it back to my contemporaries. And that you know, coming into the military today is much different than it was 40 or 50 years ago. And one other side note here is we've just come out of 20 plus years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think a lot of the publicity around those two wars and the constant deployment and the constant away from home, that has now been reduced. You're not going to be deployed every 6 months out of every 18 months now. And if there's any good thing to come out of us pulling out of Afghanistan, we're not deploying troops there anymore. So I mean, from the family perspective, it's going to be a much more family friendly oriented military today. And if there's any good sign to the Ukraine war, is that we have trained their military forces for years. We have worked with them for decades, and they're being incredibly successful. So we know what we do works, and we know it's rewarding. That's a message I want to get across. And lastly, we know obesity is a huge problem, but it can be beaten down, as Dr. Rothberg has pointed out.
Dr. Rothberg, any final thoughts?
Well, I would echo General Cheney's sentiments, and I would just say that here is where the military, again, could be the leaders. They could embrace taking care of obesity with these effective strategies and lead the way so that our civilian population will also be impacted.
And General Zanakis, any final thoughts?
No, look, I mean, as the military is a great microcosm of society. It's a great place where, as Dr. Rothberger said and General Cheney said, and so let's take the lead. Let's do it, and let's show what the strength and what makes us great as a country. So here's a chance for us to move forward.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their time and their expertise. I'd like to thank members of the audience for attending. If you haven't seen it in the chat, there is a link to the report, but otherwise go to americansecurityproject.org and you can download it and take a look at it yourself. It's got some interesting information in it that I think will provoke some thoughts about how to resolve this issue. Otherwise, take a look at our website. Within the next couple of days, we'll have a recording of this program up for your use, and please help us circulate. With that, thank you, everyone, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Good pleasure to be here.